So this actually connects way back to our intro activity that was about redistricting, and you can sort of see that, and that's kind of what we explored, how redistricting can affect elections. And in most states, whoever's currently in charge, whatever party currently has charge of the state Congress, gets to control redistricting. Arizona is actually pretty progressive in that sense. In 2010, instead of just letting whatever party's in charge redistrict, they decided it needed to be a panel that had, I think, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and an independent chair seat decide on the redistricting. So, Arizona, a lot of times in the news for not being super progressive with their political ideas. That was actually one that is pretty progressive and will help us prevent gerrymandering, which is what we're going to talk about. So in this table, we can look at the election year, and we can see the president's popular vote margin of victory, the House of Representatives mean margin of victory, and the percentage of House seats changing party. So in 1992, the president had won by 5.6% in the popular vote. The House of Representatives mean margin of victory was over 30%. And then the percent of House seats that changed party was only 11%. And you can see that these trends kind of continue, right? 2000 is one of the most interesting and drastic. And since then, up until the last election in 2016, there hadn't been a president who didn't win the popular vote, but did win the presidency due to electoral votes and basically due to districting, right? And so you see this vast disparity between popular vote and the margin of victory in Congress. And the reason being, popular vote is just everybody, it's tabulating who everybody votes for president. And basically, you have a choice between 2 people, right? But Congress is elected by district, or at least, the House of Representatives specifically is elected by district. And because they can control the way they draw district lines, they'll generally draw them in a way that they can control and quote unquote steal an election, right? So this is an example of if you had 50 precincts and 60% were blue and 40% were red, if you divided them just kind of randomly, as you would expect they should be divided, blue wins, right? But if you let red control how they want to district this situation, red can district them where they, as we learned in our intro activity, where they create districts that are dense for blue, but that are a little bit more spread out for red, but red will win them, and red can overall win the election, right? All right, so this example, again, this is not something I would need you to write down. You have these slides available to you. I just want to talk through it, and that's going to be a lot of this lesson, to be honest. So it says North Carolina has 13 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. Its redistricting process is controlled by state legislature. And so what they mean there is that whoever's in charge in the state legislature, it's either going to be Republicans or Democrats, they get to do the redistricting. Following the 2000 census, the legislature was controlled by Democrats who drew the district maps for elections from 2002 to 2010. Some of these maps were modified following court challenges. And then after the 2010 census, the legislature was controlled by Republicans who drew the redistricting maps for 2012 through this year. The table below shows the overall North Carolina results for the elections immediately before and after, based on the 2010 census maps took effect. Analyze the data to decide how partisan advantage in the state legislature affects results of House elections. So you can see in the 2010 which were Democratic maps, the statewide vote for Democratic House candidates was only 45%, but for Republicans was 54%. So Republicans had the majority of votes when we don't look at districts at all, if we just look at everybody's vote in the state. But the way it works is you only get to vote in your district. And because at that time they were Democratic maps, we had 7 Democrats elected and only 6 Republicans, even though Republicans had the majority of the popular vote. Then in 2012, these are now based on Republican district maps. Democrats had the majority of the popular vote, but only won 4 House members, whereas Republicans won 9. And again, this just reiterates kind of what we learned way back in that intro activity, that really who draws the maps gets to win the elections. And it's because people tend to group themselves by community, by their party affiliation. You don't need to copy anything from this slide, Naomi. You have it available to you. It's posted there as a PDF on Canvas. I just wanted to talk through it. All right, you will want to write this definition down, please. So gerrymandering is the drawing of district boundaries to serve political interests of the politicians in charge of the drawing process. So go ahead and write that definition and then give me a green check when you're done. Suppose that somehow the legislature could draw boundaries of District 1 so that all of its 1 million people were Democrats. If the remaining population were randomly distributed among the 5 other districts, what would most likely be the distribution of the 6 House seats? Okay. So what they're doing is they're trying to draw the districts so that they compact one of the districts to be all Democrat, right? So what we have, remember, is 3 million Democrats, and we have 3 million Republicans. And in one of the districts, they've taken 1 million Democrats away, right? So that leaves us with only 2 million Democrats remaining. Now, this one district that's just completely packed with Democrats is going to win that seat, right? So they won 1 House seat. So there are 5 seats remaining. So there are 5 districts up for grabs, right? And there are a total of 5 million voters remaining. $1 million in each district. Well, if you expect them to be randomly drawn districts at this point, you're going to expect each district to maybe have the same amount of Republicans as Democrats in it, right? So each district in that case should have, what's 3 million divided by 5? So 3 million divided by 5, so I'll write this out. Each district should have about 600,000 Republicans. That's just the 3 million Republicans divided into the 5 districts, right? And then 2 million divided by 5 is 400,000 Democrats. So if they're just randomly distributed to district, each district would then have 600,000 Republicans and 400,000 Democrats. And who's going to win each one of those districts in the chat? Yeah, exactly. So the Republicans win the 5 remaining districts. So if everything was evenly distributed, we would expect there to be 3 Democratic seats and 3 Republican seats. But if there's a Republican legislature and they get to gerrymander, they get to draw the district lines, the way they would want to do it is try and condense as many Democrats as they can in one district and then try and draw districts that spread the remaining Republicans out over all the rest of the districts so that they, even if they only get a small majority, they have a majority and win all the rest of those seats. All right. So boundary drawing. The courts have generally allowed even very convoluted district boundaries to stand as long as they do not violate any specific laws and meet the following criteria. So you will want to write the criteria, just a couple bullet points for criteria that you need to know for how district boundaries may be drawn. They want all districts to have basically equal populations. And that's to kind of try and contain the voting power so that everybody tends to have almost equal voting power. That's why when you look at like the Arizona districts, you'll see that the Phoenix has like very small district because Phoenix is a populous city, but then like when you move into northern Arizona, the districts are gigantic and they'll contain like Flagstaff and Prescott and Jerome and Cottonwood, just so that there are equal populations. And then each district must be contiguous. And that just means it must be connected everywhere. You can't have like, it can't be Hawaii. It can't be an archipelago. You know what I mean? It has to be just one mass. All right, give me a green check when you're done with this slide and then I'll move on. So here's another example. Suppose the state to the right has 4 districts with 4 voters each. Find a way to draw boundaries so that one of the districts is all Republicans, leaving Democrats with either a majority or a tie in all of the other districts. And remember that a district must be contiguous, but there are no other restrictions. And so I just put the solution right here. So right, that Republican district that's diagonal is convoluted, but it doesn't violate any of the policies. It is contiguous, and there are the same number of voters as in other boundaries. And that way the remaining, right, I got a Democrat, this one's a tie, so that's a swing, and then this one's a Democrat. All right, so what can we do about this gerrymandering thing? Well, there are some ideas for reform, right? And like I said, Arizona had a pretty progressive policy back in 2010 when they instituted the panel rather than having whoever's in charge of the legislature draw the districts. So you could do a nonpartisan panel, and many other countries use those independent panels, like Great Britain, Australia, and Canada, and a handful of states, including us, do the same. And some people argue that nobody is truly nonpartisan, which is why Arizona did, okay, well then there has to be 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. It's like the thing you do as a parent where you go, okay, I have 2 kids. You guys can have a half a cookie. Henry, you break it in half, and then Jillian, you get to choose which half you want. And that kind of forces, right, Henry to be equal in the way that he's going to break it. So the other idea is to come up with a mathematical algorithm that would draw the boundaries independent of any human input. Unfortunately, that's extremely difficult, and that's kind of a chaos theory problem that even computers can't handle right now. They are working on it, and they are working on ways where they can at least have a computer produce possible districts so that they can then look at what those districts would look like in real life, but we're just not there yet. And other than that, I would say make sure you fill out your census. because that lets the government know that you are there, and that will influence how redistricting works. That's it. You got a problem set, and you have a open note quiz to take. So hold on one second.